Welcome to the Inside Carolina podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Ashley, joined by Jason Staples and Greg Barnes, sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com. We are recording this at our usual time, Thursday night, the Game Plan podcast. With that, Duke and North Carolina play Saturday at noon. Greg Barnes, it's in Durham. Don't know if it matters much. I believe Durham has no fans. Rivalry game, though. Carolina has struggled with Duke in the past, but not under Mack Brown. How's this game going to go, Greg?
Well, you know what? I'm actually going to challenge you on that, Tommy. I was actually looking at that earlier. We know what happened last year, right? We know basically Duke choked that game away. And I guess you could, if you want to make the argument Carolina did first, I'll give that to you. But just the way Duke finished that game off, all you got to do is hand off and you win the game. And you have whatever kind of silly play that was that Cutcliffe called, outthought himself, and
got cute at the goal line.
He got cute at the goal line. That's right. And Chad Strapp makes a great play and secures the victory. But look, a lot of these games, as you say, have been competitive, and it's part of the rivalry aspect of it. Fans really like to talk about the NC State game for good reason, but this, for whatever reason, this game has always largely been competitive. I mean, if we go back 2018, it was 42-35. We had a 28-27. Now, when Carolina was really good in 2015, that was a blowout, right? But even if you go back to when Mack was here the first time, let's see here, 92, Carolina won 31-28. 94, 41-40. 95, 28-24. And even in 96, which was arguably Mack's best year, although I guess you could, 97's in the mix too. It was only 27-10. So it wasn't like a bloodbath. Now, of course, 97, it was pretty sloppy. Carolina won that one 50-14. But more often than not, this has been a competitive game. And that plays a role in the spread of this game only being 11 because Duke's going to grind. And Duke has a good defense this year. We'll get into it. So this is not a game Carolina can take lightly. Is this a game North Carolina should win? Absolutely. But they can't sleepwalk. They can't allow themselves to stumble like they've done in some of these games and dig a huge hole. That will make it very, very difficult. So competitive game, but I think North Carolina has enough horses that if they take care of business and do what they're supposed to do, they should win handily. We'll get into predictions later, but I don't think I'm surprising anybody by making those kind of comments to open the show.
Yeah,
horses and dancing bears.
Dancing Bears, yes. Jason, if you want to know where the Dancing Bear comes from, Jason's video on Joshua Ezeudu has been quite popular at InsideCarolina.com on the message boards. Jason, why is this game, Carolina and Duke, always, like Greg said, close? I mean, Mack won all of them his first go-round, and he's won the ones here. I think he's 9-2 against Duke. The only time he lost to Duke maybe were those two 1-10 seasons.
41 zip. Remember that one, don't you, Tommy?
Oh yeah, Chucky Burnett and Todd
Spurrier.
Burnett and Spurrier's photo under the scoreboard. Yeah. Too soon, Greg. It's only been like 40 years. Jason, when you look at it, it's always close and it's always crazy. I still can't believe, and we talked about this as a family the other day because I thought my children were there, but they weren't. I still can't believe Carolina won the game last year. If there's ever been a moment in a football game where I just could not believe what happened, it was last year with Chad Surratt's interception. Why is this game close?
That's a good question, and I don't know. I don't have a solid, easy answer for it. I mean, one is obviously it's a rivalry game, and the old saw about throw out the record books in a rivalry game isn't completely wrong. So you do have that aspect of it that these two teams do recruit a lot of from the same talent pool traditionally, and there are the throw the record book type things that you're going to see from Duke in this game. They're going to pull out the stops to try to win this game, but I think probably if I had to guess, it's mostly styles make fights, and just in terms of the style of play that Duke has played over the years. That's been the biggest factor. And, going back, I don't really remember a whole lot about Duke back in the mid 90s, partly because they just weren't very good. So I can't really speak to what the matchups were there back with Mack in those days. But I mean, during the Fedora days when those games were close or Duke was winning those games, the biggest difference was physicality, and that especially once Cutcliffe took over, Duke came in and pushed Carolina around at times on the defense, and they took it to them physically with a bit of a chip on their shoulder, and Carolina didn't always respond all that well in the Fedora era to teams that really got physical with them. So I think that probably was a factor. I think with Mack in town, that's going to become increasingly less of a factor as they really push for this team to get more physical. But that is something that I think is probably a factor is over the last few years when you're looking at this game, that Duke has overperformed, partly because they've been better on the line of scrimmage than their record might indicate. I mean, Duke's usual weaknesses are in the back seven and the skill positions. They've generally recruited better talent, especially on the offensive line, but they've usually got serviceable players on the defensive line. And this year's no different. They've actually got a pretty good defensive line. So when you add those things together, they're usually competitive enough up front. They're physical. They have generally avoided turning the ball over a bunch to Carolina. And so you end up getting some interesting games.
Greg, talking about the physicality, I guess that, I don't want to talk about Larry Fedora era, but I guess that kind of sums up the Larry Fedora era, that Duke was more physical than North Carolina. I think Mack Brown's got that changed around, but
it's not
that's
completely changed because they did get out hit in the two games that they lost this year.
Sure.
I mean, you could see the beginning, especially that first half against Florida State, they got out physicaled in that game.
Right.
And
But
I think the coaching staff would absolutely say that they got out hit and out physicaled in both of their losses, and that was a big factor. And that's something they're trying to get fixed.
So Greg, how much of that is a mindset for North Carolina versus a whatever talent issue, whatever you want to call it?
I think it's equal parts both. For whatever reason, that was always an issue for Larry for most of the time, is not winning up front. I think last week, the Virginia game, I really think the reason Virginia won that game is because they won the trenches. They did not have the best players at the skill positions, but because they were manhandling UNC at times in the trenches, it was just enough to be able to pull that upset. And that's what Duke's going to try to do. They're going to try to be physical. And so I think Carolina's got some good players up front, especially offensive line. So it is a talent issue. You've got to get better talent in there, and that helps with the toughness aspect. But there's still a mental component as well. And I think defensive line-wise, I think there's just some issues with talent. Knowing Raymond Vahasek and what coaches have said about him, I don't think it's a mentality issue for him. I think he's doing – I think everything he's doing everything he can. But when you're talking about some of the other guys that they're having to rely on and not even using, who have talent, but they're just not experienced yet, I think that's part of the issue on that side of the ball. So I do think for Duke in this game, it's going to be to really smack UNC around in the trenches, kind of like what Virginia did. And again, they don't have the skill in some of those other positions that Carolina does. And that's really what's going to come down to is, can North Carolina take advantage of their talent? And if they do, this should work in their favor. But if Duke has a chance, it's by being more physical than UNC in the trenches.
Yeah, it's one of those situations where Duke wants this to be a to they want it to be a brawl.
Sure.
And Carolina wants this to be a boxing match. I mean, that's really the styles make fights aspect of this. Carolina wants to box, and Duke wants to get inside and just slug away at each other and see who stands.
And try to get to the 12th round instead
of right.
And try to avoid the knockout.
Yeah, and Carolina wants to stay outside, jab a few times, and then score a quick knockout early and see if they can do that. That's just the way the teams are built right now. And by the way, there's one other thing that's worth noting. There's a third aspect to this, not just mindset and not just personnel. There's also a scheme component to physicality. And it's not exactly what you might think it is, but I've talked to coaches in the past, and some successful coaches, national championship coaches, who have said that one of the most difficult things about running all spread. So if you're going to just go, say, up-tempo spread, and you're going to be mostly let's say an inside zone RPO team. So you're going to box count with, Larry Fedora's offense is this, right? You're going to run inside zone, but you're counting the box. And if they've got an extra guy in the box, you're going to throw the ball on the perimeter. And for the most part, Carolina does that now. I mean, a lot of what Phil Longo does is very similar to a lot of what Fedora did. We've talked about this for a couple of years. And that, that's your thing. You're not going to bash your head against a wall. That was something Fedora used to say a lot of, is I'm not just going to, bash my head against the wall when I can just go through the door over there. Right? What's the point? Well, there's a lot of truth to that in terms of the way that you want to coach football and make it, you're going to score a lot more points that way. But I've talked to some really successful head coaches who've said that's good, and you can ultimately be a lot better on offense for that, but your defense suffers for that because it affects the way you practice. And I go back to my time at Florida State as a player. We actually would wrap practices. We would wrap every scrimmage with an extended goal line period. And it was a war. I mean, you're going to line up on the 3-yard line, the 2-yard line, and the offense, it's good on good, 1s against 1s, 2s against 2s, 3s against 3s, and you get 4 downs to score. And every score goes down as a win or a loss. And the offensive side or the defensive side, if the offense wins, then the defense runs gassers after practice. If the defense wins, the offense runs gassers. I can tell you right now, those were intense parts of practice. Everybody who is not in the game would get on either side, defense in the back, behind the end zone, offense behind the offense, and jumping up and down. And, it became a passionate competition to get in the end zone or to keep you out of the end zone. And the biggest hits of practice were always there. And the level of physicality and the level of the chip on the shoulder kind of mentality, I really believed, and the coaches then believed that was a big part of the mentality that Florida State took into games in those years. That it was from those goal line periods where it became defense, what we're going to run. Offense, they know what we're going to run. And we're going to run it, and we're either going to score or not. And it's just because either you're going to be more physical or we're going to be more physical. And that element of things, I mean, that's the extreme of it. Very few teams do that anymore. But that's the extreme of it. And there are certain coaches now who still retain certain under center or certain power football concepts that they're going to make sure that they don't RPO everything in practice. They're going to make sure that they include enough power stuff in there so that when they play a team that isn't playing by everybody else's rules, when you play a Stanford or when you play a Duke or somebody that has decided they're going to go ahead and just play power football, that you're not going to get out, you're not going to get beat up. And that you have to find ways to still keep it football in the physicality sense. And it's hard to do that if everything is always finesse football, which is, we're going to box count it. We're going to go where they aren't. You can be successful on offense with that, but you still have to serve your defense. And to serve your defense, sometimes that means you've got to get into some street fight situations in practice, particularly in the spring and in camp, just to build that edge on your team. And that's something Mack, I think, really understands. And they've tried to go out of their way to do some of this.
Sure. And Tommy, we talked about this during the beginning of the Fedora era when we were kind of learning about his approach of taking what the defense gave him. And I was fascinated by it. And so, of course, I go to Roy Williams and kind of picking his brain because Roy Williams is not that way. And
Roy Williams is do what we want to do.
That's exactly right.
We're going to play Carolina basketball, period.
That's Roy's response was, look, I don't care what they want me to do. I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to be successful at it. Now, when we talk about Roy and North Carolina basketball, that's like talking about Clemson football or Alabama football.
You got the players. And Mack, and he'll tell you this, once the recruits come in, it's going to be a couple of years, but he'll be able to do that. And I think the clear sign of that is last week when he was talking to us about using analytics and metrics and those kind of things. He said, look, 4th and 1, you got Javonte Williams. You better go for it every time, and you better get it every time. Yep.
And just that one little comment tells you that he thinks when you've got talented players, you should be able to impose your will. That doesn't mean, to Jason's point, that you're hard-headed about it. If teams stack the box, you take advantage of where you can. But when times get tough and you've got to pick up a first down, you better have the personnel and the mindset that, hey, we're getting this first down. It was like Virginia last week. Virginia had to get a first down or else that game was over. They were not stopping North Carolina and Sam Howell. It was not going to happen.
And they knew it.
And they knew it. Everybody knew it.
Everybody in that stadium, everybody who was watching that game knew it.
So not to get into the fourth down call, right, defensively, but Virginia knew they had to have it, and they did what they needed to do to get it. And so it's that kind of mindset that you have to adopt. And I think what we'll see this weekend, Duke has to play physical because that's really their only shot. North Carolina needs to be able to play physical to match that, but because they have such skill, they can take shots when it's available to them, and that's the difference in these two teams.
Yeah, and you have to, and you said a mouthful when you said impose your will. And that, I mean, so much of football boils down to that phrase. Which team can impose its will on the other team? And the really good teams, the championship teams, they're good enough on the line of scrimmage to do that to teams, that they can impose their will when they want to. They can impose their will. And you have to train that into your team. You have to get the players to do it. And then you have to build the mentality of imposing your will on the other team, of breaking the other team's will. And Carolina's never quite gotten there. Even under Mack the first time, under Butch, they've always been just a step short of being able to do that. Now, it's going to be interesting. I think they're potentially recruiting to the level where they may be able to do that this time under Mack before he's done. And that's going to be the interesting thing. And he's one of those national championship coaches that I've talked to that gets it in terms of that. You have to be able to impose your will.
Yeah, I've kind of mentioned that, and that's what I thought they maybe tried to do in the first half of the Florida State game, is impose their will on Florida State. And
yeah, I agree.
And it didn't work out. Greg, one thing about these ball games, and it's interesting, remember Shaquille Rashad and countless other. I still remember Kentwan Balmer. I've referenced him in the locker room after Carolina Duke, whatever year that was, the chippiness of this aspect. This game seems to be more chippy than even the NC State-North Carolina rivalry. And Carolina may have lost the Virginia game because of that, because of not dealing with that well. Do you think that's been an emphasis this week for Mack and staff?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question, especially with some of the penalties that we saw at Virginia. You have to play with passion, you have to play with emotion, but you have to be able to control it. And there's no room whatsoever, especially in games that should be close, for you to have after the whistle penalties like Chapman and Trey Morrison had. You got to control your emotion. 15 yards is a lot, especially when you're talking about an offense like Virginia or an offense like Duke that struggles for every single yard that they get. And 15 yards is a big chunk. I mean, that's more, that's an explosive play. And so
that's a great way to put it.
And so you really do. That's something they've talked about. Penalties have been an issue for this team, and it dates back to last year. And I think one of the interesting things was when I talked to Mack about the penalty situation earlier this year, he talked about when they came in last year that they really didn't think they could be too harsh with the guys because it was a new system, new coaching staff. They were trying to get to know the players. And so they had to be, I don't want to say softer, but maybe a little bit nicer in trying to build that trust. And so they haven't gotten to a point, Fedora always did the Tar Heel circle, right? Or on corrections day on Sunday, everybody get in a big circle. They'd call out a player's name. He'd come into the middle and say, hey, I was responsible for 4 mess ups, penalties, miscues, MAs, whatever. And everybody had to do up downs. Mack's not there yet. I think he will, but that's kind of part of the building process. You have to teach these guys that is not acceptable. We have somebody to replace you, which is not necessarily the case right now. And then you kind of build that culture. And I think a year and a half in, it's not there yet, but that certainly plays a role in these games.
Jason, I want to stay here just for a minute because I'm interested in how you coach that out of people. Greg sort of talked about the process that Mack's using in trying to get there, but I mean, Florida State was notorious for talking the talk and walking the walk. For years, they were good enough to sort of overcome their lack of discipline, for lack of a better way to put it. Miami the same way. How do you aside from recruiting studs and being able to overcome it, how do you coach it out of people? Because the penalties have been an issue under Mack, under Fedora. I mean, it's not a new thing. You know, how do you get rid of it? How do you get it to be a disciplined team? Like when you see some of these teams that are lead the nation in lack of penalties, how does that happen?
Well, first of all, you don't want to be one of those teams that leads the nation in a lack of penalties, because that means you're not straddling the line enough to be the aggressive team you want to be.
Right.
As a general rule, I mean, there are a couple exceptions to that. You might look at Iowa State as maybe an exception to that, where they, because of the way that they play. But as a general rule, you want a team that there's the old SEC saying that if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. And there's something to that in terms of penalties, where if you're not drawing certain penalties, then you're not playing on the edge enough. You need to be able to be willing to draw some penalty. It's like try to play basketball without ever picking up a personal foul. That means you're not playing any defense, right? You're going to have to pick up a personal foul, but you can't pick up 6 fouls and a half. NBA, 5 fouls and a half, right? You can't do that. So you have to find that balance of playing physical within the boundaries. And actually, going back to my era at Florida State, yeah, they had great players, but those were not undisciplined teams. They played on the edge, and you go back and you look, and yeah, they let more stuff go. I mean, the high, I had my share of concussions, partly because the hit high helmet to helmet kind of stuff was encouraged in those days. That was, everybody encouraged that stuff. So I still get a little buzzy at times just because of that. But there would be the kind of penalties that those teams got were not taunting penalties. They weren't unsportsmanlike penalties generally. The kinds of penalties that those Florida State teams drew were maybe a late hit penalty where a guy was playing just on the edge and quarterback is going down and he's taking one extra shot. And they're willing to take that on the chance of, that's one more body blow for that team. That was not so much a lack of discipline as those teams played on the edge, and sometimes they'd get called for it, and rightfully so. And they were willing to play that game. You want to be there. You want to be where if just like in basketball, if you're going to get called for a foul, make it count.
Right. Exactly.
No and ones, right? Get called for a foul, you better make that thing dang count. And what you can't get is technical fouls. You can't get dead ball penalties where somebody pushes you and then you take a swing at it. Like, that's just stupid. And so what you have to do is the Morrison penalty. That's the one that's going to eat at me the rest of the season. I'm still so hot under the collar for that. Just as a from the coaching side, like, man, you're having trouble stopping this team. You get a stop. You get it right before half. Everything's good. You got momentum. What? Oh, you've got to be kidding me, right? So, that's the thing that drives you crazy. And what we did, and I believe in it, back in the Florida State days, is if you got a penalty, if you got a stupid penalty, the whole team ran. Stadiums. So if you got a 15-yard penalty, the whole team ran 15 stadiums, and they had to do it under time.
Peer pressure is a wonderful thing.
Oh, peer pressure works wonders on a football team. And that's worse than up downs, I can promise you. You go into Tuesday's practice with dead legs. Because, you had two guys that, one guy that had a 15-yarder and another guy that had a 15-yarder, and the team runs 30 stadiums on Monday. Everybody hates those two guys. You're talking about, code red ordered in the locker room kind of stuff. That stuff gets fixed. There can be fights in practice. And that stuff gets fixed real quick. And I did this as a coach in high school. And my first year at Durham, Jordan, my players learned that my way of grading loafs, low effort plays, my way of grading loafs was different than they were used to, because I would go through the film and I would watch all my guys in my segment. And if you were on the other side, it's a run to the right. You're the wide receiver to the far left. I see you come off the ball slowly and you don't block anybody. That's a loaf. But coach, I'm on the other side. I don't care. You get a loaf. Oh, and by the way, every loaf means the whole wide receiver segment does a 70-yard bear crawl.
You were fine.
I had one player with I think 22 loafs the first game.
Oh,
every player did bear crawls for those. And he wasn't the only guy with loafs. You know how many loafs I had week 2?
Zip.
I had 2 loafs.
Yep.
Week 2. And by the way, I did the bear crawls of my players.
That's not. I can imagine that.
If you guys are doing it, then it's on me. It's on me. It's my fault. So I'm going to go ahead and do them with you. But and I'm going to mock you all along if you're not keeping up with me because I'm an old man. But we're going to do bear crawls together, and we're not even getting better today in terms of all this stuff, because some of the stuff we could be doing after practice that would be getting us better as a group, we're not doing because we're just sitting here doing bear crawls because you all didn't want to show effort. But guess what happens if that guy fumbles, or if we get a play, that guy breaks a tackle and you're not getting up there, getting to the safety? That's your fault that we don't score. Or let's say that he does get to the safety and the safety forces a fumble and you're not there. We don't recover that fumble because of you. Well, they got that pretty quickly because peer pressure worked. I don't want all of my guys to be yelling at me because and trying to punch me after practice because I had everybody doing bear crawls. And I changed it up sometimes. It'd be 5 or it might be 10 up downs I had 10 up downs for every missed assignment for the whole group. And you do this stuff and it works. I believe in peer pressure.
Absolutely. Let's oh yeah. I mean, that's what don't make me run. I remember back in the day, if somebody missed a free throw, they didn't run. The rest of the guys ran.
Everybody else. Oh man.
Yeah. And that's the best way to get your butt kicked in practice, or after practice. Let me take a second and talk about Johnny T-Shirt, johnnytshirt.com. We're going to get into the game plan portion. I was just checking my email as Jason was talking. I got an email from Johnny T-Shirt on an early Black Friday deal. So if you're listening to this on Friday, you need to go to Johnny T-Shirt right now. It's 15% off, additional 15% off all sale prices.
Woo!
Anytime they have a sale, you get a great deal. If you're a premium subscriber for Inside Carolina, you get 10% on top of that. And they're wonderful. They've got the mask. We always talk about the mask with Jason. They're becoming more and more relevant, with the winter coming. So mask, but they've got the rivalry gear. They've got all kinds of Carolina football gear, basketball gears coming up. November 25th, start of basketball season. Just hard to believe we're almost there. Johnny T-Shirt on Franklin Street. They are wonderful people, alumni owned and operated, great friends of Inside Carolina, and certainly great friends of Inside Carolina premium subscribers. The aforementioned 10% off your order. Go see them in person. Go see them online. Shop them. If you listen to the Inside Carolina live show on Saturday, they even give gifts. We have giveaways, gift cards and jerseys and all that stuff. Johnny T-Shirt, just awesome folks. Support them. They're local. They need our business. Take another break. National media or national ads, and we'll come back and we'll talk Duke, North Carolina game plan podcast on InsideCarolina.com.
The best ads, believe me.
The bestest. We'll be right back.
Bigly.
We're back with Inside Carolina podcast. It's been an interesting week, an exhausting week here in America, but Inside Carolina is always kicking out the content. Greg Barnes is with us. Jason Staples, the Game Plan podcast. It's recording on the evening, so those on YouTube know what we're talking about. Greg, let's look at North Carolina and Duke. We've talked about how it's always close. Carolina goes over to Wallace Wade at noon on Saturday. I think the 99th straight year they've played, 107 overall. I mentioned before, I still can't believe how that game turned out last year. How is this game not different or different from last year from North Carolina, where it doesn't come down to some crazy, bizarre play that David Cutcliffe gets too cute on? What's North Carolina got to do? Let's talk about on the offensive side first to deal with Duke's decent defensive line.
Yeah, I think Duke has a good defense. I think when you get to the offensive side, when we get there, Tommy, there's a good explanation for why Duke's currently, what are they, 2-5?
Mm-hmm.
I think North Carolina is going to be tested. It's going to be similar to what we saw really against Virginia, in that Duke's goal is going to be to get to Sam Howell as best they can, and they've got some challenges there. Did you ask me to start on defense, Carolina's defense or Duke's defense?
No, what does Carolina have to do on offense?
Okay,
first?
So I'm on track here.
You're right.
I've been tripped up on that several times.
It's been a tough week, guys.
It has been a tough week.
We talked before we got online, and just so everybody know, we were talking about what's going on in the world. It's been exhausting, and it makes it exhausting to even talk sports. But Greg, yes, what's Carolina have to do on offense to be effective against Duke's, like I said, decent defense?
Right. I think the defense is solid. And I think really if you look at what Virginia did last week, it's going to be the same approach, right? It's going to be trying to get to Sam Howell before he can beat you deep, because North Carolina, while they knew there was going to be some issues up front, I mean, look at what they did. They had 12 passing plays that went for 382 yards. I mean, they had a 54-yarder, 76-yarder, 36, 29, 30, 47. That was their bread and butter. But yet, Virginia being so physical up front, they shut down the rushing attack. And even though North Carolina scored 41 points, it's because Sam Howell was really just phenomenal. He just had a heck of a game. And Tommy, you kind of know my thoughts on Sam. I think he's just had a phenomenal year, and it has made this team look a lot better than it probably is. But Duke's going to try the same approach. And I think Duke probably has better players along the defensive line. When you look at Chris Rumpf, who's just an excellent player.
It's not even close. They've got a lot better players across the defensive line.
And then Victor Dimukeji, I believe is how you pronounce his name, at the other end.
That one.
But they got 26 sacks, which is substantial. And so they're going to apply pressure. But like Virginia, their weakness is in the secondary. So it's really going to be up to the offensive line to really buy Sam Howell time. And you want to make sure that run game is operational. You don't have to have those guys have huge games, but you have to have some success. And Virginia did a really good job limiting yards after carry, yards after contact. And that's an issue. Javonte Williams had some strong plays early, but then Virginia really did a good job kind of flowing to the ball and shut that down. So Carolina needs to be able to run the ball better this week. But just buy Sam Howell some time, and they've got the skill set that Duke can't handle down the field. And I think that's the key component. Again, North Carolina can capitalize on some of those deep shots. That's going to put Duke in a difficult situation.
Jason, sticking with Carolina's offense, I mean, you talked about the Dancing Bear earlier in this podcast and on your video at InsideCarolina.com. I was looking at Duke's roster. I mean, they're loaded with seniors on the defensive line or upperclassmen on the defensive line. It sort of gets significantly younger beyond that. Pretty similar to Virginia. Carolina took advantage. I mean, when Greg's talking about Sam Howell's performance against Virginia and all the chunk plays, it's still mind-blowing that Carolina lost that game. But anyway, I mean, I don't see much difference going on in this game as far as Carolina's offense, but how do they protect Sam Howell with that Duke defensive line? What does Duke maybe do to try to get to take advantage of Carolina's offensive line maybe, or at least make Sam Howell uncomfortable?
So there's a couple things. Number one is, if you're going to try to protect Howell on this, it goes back to run what you do offensively, the default stuff, because so we've heard Mack Brown, we've heard Phil Longo talk about how this offensive line is like its weakest areas just when they have to just do drop back pass protection. And what they haven't talked about is why that is. And it's not because the personnel can't do it. It's not because the players are not as good there. It's because this offense is not designed to do that a lot. So this is where this offense is a little different from like a Mike. They're running air raid stuff, but it's not like Mike Leach air raid stuff, right? This is more Lincoln Riley air raid stuff. And so they're running a lot of the same pass concepts that you see in the air raid, but because they're doing so much RPO stuff, so run pass option stuff where it's a handoff or a throw, and I gave an example of that actually in the one of the videos that I broke down for this week. So Joffrey Brown's long touchdown that was a run play call, but it's a run play call with the pass option tagged onto it. They do so much of that's what you get good at. That's what you emphasize. You get good at what you rep. And the bread and butter in this offense is run plays with pass plays tagged onto them. And then on top of that, you have your specific pass options that are play action passes, some basic action passes that you're adding onto that. That's an additional thing. So that's where you're letting how play action, drop back, and take a shot. Those are the plays that you rep the most because that's what you're most wanting to emphasize in this offense. The place where you're not getting as many reps is just basic drop back where Howell takes the snap. There's no play action. There's no threat of a run. There's no nothing. And now your guys just have to set and pass block. Now in a Mike Leach offense, they rep that 80%, 85% of practice. That's what they work on. Is that pass pro? Because that's what they're going to be doing 80% of the time. And then they don't get as good at the run blocking. If you look at what Mike Leach offenses have done historically, they're not great at run blocking because they put all that time into the pass blocking stuff. So this is sort of a byproduct of just what they do offensively. And, you've got a little bit younger guys who haven't had as many reps also in terms of the pass protection stuff. So that just means they're not as good in pass protection when they need to be in drop back, which is going to be your long leverage plays. You're going to run your drop back passing game usually when you're in 3rd and 9, when you're in 3rd and 12, when you're in 2nd and 15, because then those things are not as big of an issue. So the biggest thing that Carolina wants to do to give themselves a good shot against protecting Howell from this pass rush is stay ahead of the chains. If you're throwing on 1st down, if you're throwing RPOs, if you're throwing on 2nd and 4, if you're throwing on 3rd and 2, then that pass rush isn't going to have the chance to pin their ears back and come at you in a pass blocking situation. Now, what does Duke need to do? You asked also, what does Duke want to do to be able to get the most pressure? They got to win 1st down. They got to be able to get Carolina in 2nd and 8, 2nd and 9, 2nd and 14, 3rd and 12. That stuff, then that tilts the balance to the pass rush because now you don't have to honor the run as much. You don't have to play your rush, your gaps as soundly. You can just get upfield and try to get after the quarterback, and that's hard on the line. So it really boils down to, can Carolina win 1st and 2nd down so that they're ahead of the chains? And my guess is that that's going to be where Duke has some trouble in this game because that's where Javonte Williams and Michael Carter come in. And that's where the offensive line for Carolina is at their best. And that's what Carolina is going to try to do is to stay ahead of the chains and throw when you want to throw, not when they want you to throw. And that's when you can dictate to the defense. And that's hard on a defense because you can't rush the way that you can otherwise.
Yeah, that's a great point. Throw when you want to rather than when they want you to. Greg, Javonte and Michael Carter did struggle against Virginia Tech. Oh, excuse me, against Virginia. Lord.
No, they did not. They did not struggle. Come on now.
Come on, man.
7 yards a carry for Michael Carter. He was 7.4, whatever it was, yards a carry.
So let me rephrase my question. Jason's about correcting people tonight. Javonte and Michael Carter had their lowest output of the season against Virginia.
Yeah, it's because they decided that they could throw for 500 yards instead.
Oh, okay. So why might that be different against Duke? Because, Duke's going to try to pressure with the defensive line, and they can make plays with the defensive line. Does Phil Longo – let's do it this way, Jason. Does Phil Longo abandon the run like he did against Virginia? Greg.
Well, it depends if he gets down by 21 points. That's a big part of it, right? When it's 41-20 in the 3rd quarter, you're forced a little bit. But also, Virginia made a point to try to limit the run as best they could. And we knew that they were a very good tackling team, and we saw that. And I think North Carolina had some success, obviously, throwing the ball. And so, I do think – I agree with Jason. Carter had some success, but he had that one big run. And I know you can't remove one big run, and that kind of changes the dynamic quite a bit. It's not statistically fair.
Yeah, for my purposes, you can remove the one big run. It excuses stats.
But that changes things quite dramatically in terms of what he did. After that, he was 8 for 24 yards, which is, it's okay. But again, like I said, you can't really remove the 38 yard. Were they as explosive as they've been? No. And you got to credit Virginia for that. But I think Jason's exactly right. I mean, as Mack Brown has said, one of the reasons that North Carolina has struggled with sacks and those kind of things is because they're putting themselves in too many obvious passing downs. And when good teams that have good athletes on the defensive line know that you're going to pass the ball, it makes it a lot easier for them. And so North Carolina has to be able to do a little bit better job early. I do think it's interesting. You go back to the Florida State game, and they really thought they could just wear down the Seminoles. And I don't know that the game plan was that bad, right?
They kind of did.
Yeah, right. It just didn't pay off because they've dug a big hole.
And that pick six and the block punt changed the game, and
absolutely.
all of a sudden you're down 24 points, and wearing them down, you came up three points short just because of that.
Right.
But we're not going to rehash that one, but wasn't the block punt at the first of the game? Don't you adjust right after that happens?
No, not with that, because it's only one score. The place where you have to adjust is after that pick six, because that changed everything.
Right. I think this is where you get into the challenge of the take what the defense gives you. And part of the issue there for North Carolina is that you've got an unbelievable quarterback, right? And you've got two really good running backs. And so we like to refer to it as overthinking things, right? But I think Longo does have a challenge in trying to figure out exactly what he wants to do. And all these teams that play North Carolina, all they want to do is get UNC behind the chains and try to get off the field. That's what defense has really become. And so that is the challenge for Longo, is making sure he can utilize that run, because we know that he can, but also be able to take shots down the field, because that's how you're going to be able to get a comfortable lead that Duke won't be able to get back from.
And I'm gonna point to a stat that's interesting here to think about in this game. 50+ yard pass plays given up on the season.
Yep.
The worst team in the ACC against FBS competition?
I would hope Duke for our purposes.
It's Duke. They've given up 5 50+ yard pass plays. The next worst is Virginia with 3, and also North Carolina with 3. And by the way, who did 2 of those come against for Virginia? And then 40+ yard pass plays given up. Duke's given up 6 of those. And you go to 30+ yards, and they've given up 13 of those. So they're in the bottom half of the conference for those as well. So they've given up a lot of long plays in the passing game, and they haven't even really played teams that can throw the ball all that well. I mean, you look at their schedule and you say, okay, Notre Dame, no deep threats, Boston College, Virginia Tech, Syracuse, NC State, and Charlotte. And against that group, they've given up the most 50+ yard pass plays in the conference. Well, if you're Phil Longo, do you decide maybe you want to test them deep a little bit, and maybe you think you can get some long plays in the passing game? I'm thinking you do.
So come out, tossing it deep early, and then let Javonte and Michael Carter get there.
That'd be what I'd do.
Eat later. So let's flip it, Greg. Well, no, I'll stay with you, Jason. Let's flip it. Carolina's defense. This is where, we predict these games, and we'll get to our predictions, and this is why I've gotten a little gun-shy predicting North Carolina games, is Carolina's defense. We can talk about how bad Duke's offense may or may not be. I'll let you guys talk about that, but I don't know if it matters against North Carolina's defense at this point. What's Jay Bateman got to do to prevent this from being a 44-41 game?
Stay out of bad leverage. If they can win first down some, can you get it? If I'm Jay Bateman, I'm playing it pretty simple. How can I produce a negative play? Can I find a way to get a negative play or no gain on first or second down? And if I can't do that, then I'm trying to survive until I get a new set of downs. And then again, I'm rolling the dice on first or second down to try to get a no gain or negative play. And the reason I'm doing that is because Duke has turned the ball over a ton this year. And that is why, by the way, Duke has the record that they do. It's not because they've been bad in other respects. Duke this year, their turnover margin is -10.
And to take that a step further, they are worst nationally in turnovers lost with 23. The next closest team has 19. So they're 4 worse than the number 113th team in the country.
And the next closest is Georgia Tech, by the way.
Right, Georgia Tech and Mississippi State. Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a lot of turnovers, guys. That's 3+ turnovers per game. So if they've shown that propensity, and by the way, what's been really frustrating for the quarterback there is that a lot of those have not been on the quarterback, even though they've gone to his account. There've been a number of them that have just gone straight off a receiver's hands, or just all sorts of different stuff that's happened that have led to 23 turnovers. But they've turned the ball over a bunch. So if I'm Jay Bateman, first of all, I want to play a lot of coverages that ideally have a guy that is going to be in position for ricochets. I don't want to play a ton of man coverage where my guys have their back to the ball against this team because of the tendency to turn the ball over. I want to play some match zone against this team to see if I can have guys in position to get hands on the ball, or to be in position for an overthrow, that sort of thing, or for a ricochet because of the way they've turned it over. And I just want to get them into leverage situations where they're more likely to turn it over. That's how I'm playing this game. If I'm Bateman, I'm willing to roll the dice a little bit against this team just to get them in positions where they're likely to turn it over and where they're going to have some trouble being consistent. So that's sell out against the run on first down. Win there, and all of a sudden things change.
Greg, I mean, I thought C.J. Bryce looked good against Notre Dame, but he has been brutal since. I mean, I'm looking at his stats, 55%, 7 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. To Jason's point, that's a lot of interceptions. Bateman's approach, shout out to Jacob Monk, who plays offensive line for Duke. He's a local kid, has started from day one there, but Duke's got a running back that's done pretty good. Jackson's, averaging 7-8 yards a game. Bateman's approach, I mean, if Bateman can't get his defense to stop Duke's run, it makes things a lot easier for Duke, because Bryce will throw it to the other team quite often.
Right, and kind of at Jason's point, I mean, the idea is to put them in obvious passing downs. And that's going to put you in a situation where you're better prepared to make some plays and get some interceptions. I will say, because of the number of sacks that Duke has allowed, it's kind of covered up Bryce's ability to run the ball. He's not a running quarterback. This is not Brennan Armstrong by any stretch. But you take the sacks out of the equation, he's averaging 6.5 yards per carry. He doesn't run a whole lot. I think when you take out the sacks, it's only about 35. So we're only talking about 5 carries per game and scrambles and design runs. But he's a decent athlete. And so that's an area when you factor it in, as you mentioned, with Jackson, as well as Durham. I mean, those are guys that can run the ball. And if they have success, that's how you stay in the game, right? Because you pass when you want to pass, not when you have to pass. I think that's part of the issue for Bryce. What I'm interested in is Mack Brown has made a really big deal about having to stop the run, and North Carolina has not done that successfully. I'd like to hear Jason's opinion on this, but I think the fact that you are relying so much on a nickel package with 2 quasi hybrids on the field along the defensive line, and Tyrone Hopper and Tamon Fox. There's some thought that maybe you don't have enough beef up there and you got to bring more guys up. When they're hitting their gaps, it works. When they're not hitting their gaps, it can kind of get ugly. And that's what Duke wants to do. They want to stay ahead of the chains. They want to prevent those turnovers. And that's how they keep this game close. And what North Carolina has to do is be able to be successful on first and second down to give yourself a chance, where Duke has obvious passing downs, where you can try to get some sacks and force some turnovers.
Jason, I'll let you follow there. Stopping the run for Duke.
No, I agree with that. And I think the difficulty for Bateman is that you've got to have the personnel to put bigger personnel on the field. And right now they're trying to scheme around some personnel limitations up front. And the reason that they're going with both Hopper and Tamon Fox on the edge is, okay, so who on the roster are you going to put out there to be the big end? Right now, you don't really have a guy that you look at and like, okay, that's a guy that can really be my big end. Maybe Murphy is starting to grow. He's starting to show that he might have the ability to be a third guy there that you can put out there in that kind of situation. And he's got, some nice fluidity about him. But then if they do decide to run wide and he's responsible for the wide gap, you're a little more limited. So, this is the thing, is that right now they just don't have a clear answer in terms of what they can do to get more beef on the field without getting worse.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people will say, why don't you put Jaleel Taylor out there so you have 3 defensive linemen? But again, to Jason's point there, if you know it's going to be a run play and it's going to be an inside zone, well, yeah, of course you'll do that. But if it's not, then you're saying, okay, do I want Jaleel Taylor out there, or do I want a guy like Tyrone Hopper who may not be as physical at the point of attack, but he can chase people down and he can drop into coverage and do a lot more things than what Taylor can do. And that's really the challenge for Bateman right now.
Yeah, and honestly, watching the tape a little more closely, Taylor's been pushed around a little bit at times this year as well. So, just getting the bigger guy out there doesn't necessarily mean he's going to hold up better in that situation either. I mean, Hopper's actually played pretty well at different points.
Mm-hmm.
So, and he's won with quickness in certain cases where he's actually been in the gap. He's won with quickness. He's bounced guys. He's been, and other times he's won with some leverage and some strength. So the thing is, you have to calculate, like, okay, is it just because this guy's heavier that they're going to have a harder time? Not necessarily, because sometimes that guy gets pushed around, even if he's bigger. So, and you got to remember, I mean, these guys are sophomores, right? I mean,
yep.
Tamari Fox is a sophomore, right? You've got Jaleel Taylor. These are young guys, and these are not Clemson's 5-star, number 1 overall recruit in the country, number 7 overall recruit in the country, freshmen or sophomores. These are guys that came in as 3-star sophomores that it's going to take time to get them ready not to get pushed around against grown men. And so that's the hard part and some of this is, you get a guy like Hopper who's a little bit older. He's a year older. I think he might be actually 2 years older if I think about it in terms of calendar years. And that in itself matters. So, I mean, I know Bateman is kind of chomping at the bit to get some of the younger guys more time and get them on the field, because some of those young guys have the ability to, just physically they came in more ready, but they've got to be ready in every respect to be able to do that. And they've got to be where every coach on the defense and the head coach has to trust them. But he's, he knows that, look, we've got guys that are waiting that can be upgrades physically in some of these positions and can actually give me a little more flexibility, but they're not quite ready. But again, I think every week that goes by, you're going to see a few more reps from a guy like Murphy, maybe see a couple reps from Pinder. You're going to see increased reps from a guy like Evans, and all of these guys are going to get more time. But it's just, it's a matter of coaching around those issues right now.
Yeah, somebody tweeted at me after the Virginia game, why can't Bateman play his young guys? Clemson seems to play their young guys, and they do well.
Yeah, of course.
And I just kind of left that.
Their young guys would be the best players on North Carolina's defense. I mean, Brzee would be the best player on North Carolina's defense probably this year, minus maybe Surratt, and that'd be close.
Yeah, and that's why I kind of left that one alone. Not quite at that level, folks. Let's go to predictions. Carolina and Duke, Saturday, 12 noon. I mean, Carolina's Duke and Carolina. I think this is a big game for the fan base, at least the old school fan base. Greg, I'll let you go first. I mean, after last week, this is a game that Mack Brown needs to put his imprint on in a good way. Tell us how it shakes out.
Yeah, North Carolina bounced back pretty good from their first loss against Florida State, against State. Now, granted, State didn't have a starting quarterback, and their offense was a bit of a mess. But I think this is a game where a lot of stuff has to break right for Duke. And if it does, it can be a competitive game. But given what Duke has done offensively, especially with the turnovers, I think Sam Howell, as well as he's playing, they're not going to be able to slow him down completely. And I think a couple turnovers in UNC's favor will give this to UNC handily. So I've got the Tar Heels winning this one 35-17.
Jason, what you think?
Good pick, channeling my inner Corso. I'm just going to echo pretty much everything he said. I mean, it's a matter of whether Duke has to do a lot of things to really get this game to break right for them, and things that they haven't done a bunch of this year so far. Particularly, they've got to not put the ball on the ground or throw interceptions, and we'll see how that goes. I do think this will be a little tighter. I'm going to go. I think Carolina's going to add to that long scrimmage play total overall, and I think you're going to see Carolina go over 40 again. So I'm going to go with Carolina 45, Duke 34.
That's fair. What's the line, Greg, right now?
I think it's 11.
Oh, so right on the line.
I'm sure that was a coincidence. I think Carolina scores a lot of points. Look, like I said earlier in the podcast, the last couple of weeks have kind of or not the NC State game, but every other game is kind of made me gun shy to predict any major blowout. So I'm gonna go Carolina 47, Duke 35. I just think, until Bateman's defense can stop an average offense, I think it'll be a similar shootout. But I think Duke will turn it over. If Duke does not have any turnovers, and
then this will be a close game.
Yeah, then this is going to be one of those 41-40 games in Wallace Wade.
And especially since Duke's really good on special teams too, and that's been an Achilles heel for Carolina. And that's a phase of the game where I keep my eye on that. If Carolina's able to hold it even on special teams, then that really helps them. But Duke's been a lot better on that side of the ball.
Yeah, that if there's one place, and it's probably my fault, that we've been neglectful on these podcasts is special teams, and it has absolutely killed Carolina.
How many times did UNC punt last week, Tommy?
None.
Zippo.
Yeah.
But still managed to lose special teams.
Yeah,
you have to work real hard to never punt and lose the special teams battle. Carolina did that in losing to Virginia. We'll see how it goes on Saturday. It's been the Game Plan Podcast, sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt. Greg Barnes and Jason Staples have joined me. It's always fun, boys.
Enjoy your election week.